Hey everyone, this is Dr. Jenkins, and here we are for our first real chapter. And it's pretty long, so we're going to break this video up into a couple different parts. But it's a really important chapter because what we're going to be doing is we're going to be introducing the basic nutrients, structure and function. And then we're going to be talking about nutritional guidelines, how much to eat, and then how to read the nutrition label and all that good stuff. So there's a lot going on, but you're going to bear with me, and I'm always going to tell you what's most important to know. If there's something that's interesting but you don't need to know, then I'll say that. Like, hey, this is interesting, you don't need to know it. Conversely, if something's really important, I'm going to circle it, I'm going to say this is what you need to know. All right, so let's jump right in. Make sure you just go over the basics, folks. I'm not even going to read these to you because you can read. What we're talking about in this course is sports nutrition. Basically, sports nutrition is how nutrients affect us as it relates to physical activity. It doesn't necessarily need to be a team sport. It could just be someone who's active or even working outside gardening or something, right? So basically, sports nutrition is the study of, or the science of, how these nutrients affect our body as it relates to activity. What are nutrients? Nutrients are these chemical compounds in food. And what we're talking about, which we're going to see in a minute, carbohydrates, fat, protein, vitamins, minerals, water. These are these chemical compounds that we eat. They're in our food. And then they have a certain function in our body. Sometimes that function in our body can be to give us energy. Other times it can give structure. There's a whole bunch of things. But a nutrient is just a chemical compound in a food that has a certain function in our body. Good. Let's talk about those nutrients. This is super important. We're going to have whole chapters on these later. I bet you can't wait. So of the nutrients, there are 6 categories. 4 of them are considered macronutrients, really important. Now, when we say macronutrients, we don't necessarily mean that they're bigger in size. You might look at that word and that's what you think, which would be logical, but that's not what it means in this case. A macronutrient is a nutrient that we need to eat more of. It's kind of written here, maybe a little bit confusing, so let me just be as simple as I can. These are nutrients that we need to eat more. They're not necessarily bigger in size, these nutrients, macronutrients, carbs, fat, protein, and water, but they're macro because we need more of them in our diet. Make sure you can define that. A macronutrient is a nutrient that we need to bring in a lot of in our diet. And make sure you know which are the macronutrients: carbs, fats, proteins, water. On the other hand, and once you know one, you know the other, a micronutrient is one that we don't need to eat as much of, need less of in our diet. So they're not necessarily smaller in size, we just need to eat less of them. And what are the micronutrients? Vitamins and minerals. It doesn't mean that vitamins and minerals are less important. They're actually all important. But it's just that vitamins and minerals we don't need to bring in as much of for them to give us the function that we need. Now we're going to have whole chapters on these later. Okay. We are going to introduce these just to give us a foundation. So it would probably be best to start with defining these: a macronutrient, a micronutrient, and then knowing which ones are which. Carbs, fat, proteins, water are macronutrients because we need more of them in the diet. Vitamins and minerals are micronutrients because we only need less of them in the body. They're all important, just need less of them. You don't need to worry about this slide because we're about to go into the basic functions of them. So don't worry about this slide for now. And as I was saying before, when I say this, I really mean it. So don't worry about this slide for now. It's easy to lose sight of this, and sometimes you'll see I have these slides, and it's meant to just kind of stop you in your tracks for a minute. Like, wait a minute, hold on. You know, it's easy to lose sight of why we need food. A lot of times in this day and age, food we think of because it tastes good or because we just want it. But in its simplest form, the food is what our body needs to be able to work. A lot of the food acts as fuel. If we don't put nutrients into our body, your cells are not going to have the energy to do what they need to do. It's like putting gas into a car. The car engine parts are not going to work if you don't give it fuel, oil. Same thing with our body. So I just want to take a moment just to bring that big point home. Okay. I'm going to move quickly through this, but you definitely need to know this. Even though we have whole chapters about this later, I just want to introduce them. Okay, so we already know a macronutrient is one that we need more of in our diet, carbs, fat, proteins, water, and a micronutrient is something that we need less of, vitamins and minerals. We're going to go over this briefly. Let's start with carbohydrates. So we're starting with the macronutrients. Everybody's heard of these. Let's keep it simple to begin with. You need to know structure and function. In terms of the structure, what you need to know from this slide, there are simple sugars and complex. Carbohydrates, folks, are sugars. A sugar is a carbohydrate. There are simple sugars or carbohydrates, which just means that they're smaller in size. A monosaccharide, the prefix mono means one. A monosaccharide is a one sugar molecule. A disaccharide is a two sugar molecule. Those are our simple sugars because they're smaller in size. And then we have our complex sugars, which are the polysaccharides. Poly means many. So anytime we have three or more sugars put together, that's a complex sugar. Everything else on this slide is extra. So we're starting with carbohydrates, one of our macronutrients. What's the basic structure? There are simple sugars, a mono, one sugar, or disaccharide, two sugars. Simple sugars, smaller in size. And then there are complex sugars, which would be our polysaccharides, big, long, three or more sugars. You don't need to know the chemical structure. Oftentimes I just put it on here so you could see. This is not a chemistry class, which you might be happy about. But that's what it looks like. You don't need to know it. So this is just reviewing what I already talked about. These two are our simple sugars. A monosaccharide is a one sugar. I would like you to know what is an example of a monosaccharide? Glucose. You've heard of that. Glucose is a one sugar molecule. This is what you think of. This is the sugar, the monosaccharide that circulates in your bloodstream. People sometimes check their blood sugar. What are they checking for? The amount of glucose in their blood. Monosaccharide. Then we have a disaccharide, also a simple sugar. An example that I would like you to know of a disaccharide is sucrose. Sucrose is table sugar. If you add sugar to your coffee, when you're cooking with sugar and you add a cup of sugar, sucrose. But these are simple. And then we have polysaccharides, 3 or more. Here it says 10, but just know it's a long chain. This is our complex sugar. Some examples are starch and fiber. We know about starchy foods, potatoes, things like that. Fiber, it's in your frosted mini wheats in the morning. And then we also have glycogen. I'd like you to know all 3 of these. Glycogen is stored glucose. You might hear it called stored sugar. So what happens is the glucose is our monosaccharide, the one sugar molecule that circulates in our bloodstream. But we don't need to keep all of our sugar in the bloodstream. So when we want to store some for later, we take that glucose, that one sugar, and we store it as glycogen, stored sugar. And you can see from the pictures, again, you don't need to know this, but sometimes I just like to show, glucose is just a one sugar. When we put all these one sugars together into these long chains, they're called polysaccharides. And here's what glycogen looks like. So you've seen these before. Glucose is our monosaccharide. You can see here, so I wanted you to know glucose. Fructose we'll see a lot in some of our supplements, our sports nutrition aids like GU. You'll see fructose, that's what's in fruit. And then sucrose is table sugar. So again, you only need to know the two that I've starred here or circled. These are our polysaccharides, fiber and starch. We know fiber and starchy foods. And then glycogen is our stored glucose. Okay? There's a lot of extra information on here. You just need to know what I'm pointing out. Okay. This is one of my favorite cartoons. So, I'd like you to know how much of our diet should come from each of these macronutrients. We're going to define AMDR later, but right now I'd like you to just put this in your memory bank. As a matter of fact, I'm going to be saying this so often, it's almost like it's going to be tattooed in your memory, folks. How much of our diet each day should come from carbohydrates? Somewhere between 45 and 65% of our diet should come from carbs. I know people, it's become trendy now. People, low carb, we don't need carbs, this. But I like you to know that we need somewhere between 45 and 65% of our diet to come from carbs. You don't need to know the grams. These are just examples. You don't need to know this up here. Don't worry about that. Just know the percentages. Somewhere between 45 and 65% of our diet should come from carbs. Why is it a range? Because everyone's different. If you're an endurance athlete, you're probably going to be on the higher end of that. If you're pretty sedentary, you'll be on the lower end. If you're a diabetic, you'll be on the lower end. So we give a range to account for individuality. But as you can see, this is going to be what we need the most of compared to fat and protein. Why? The biggest function of carbohydrates, energy. This is what our cells go to first for energy. This is what our cells go to first. So carbohydrates, what is their function? Energy, energy, energy. No one should miss this on a quiz or exam question. What is the function of carbohydrates? Energy! Am I getting it across? Am I getting the point across? I hope so. So that's your first thing to memorize, energy. And then we're going to be a little bit more specific. When we say energy, I also want you to know carbohydrates is what we turn to first for energy. Quick energy. When our cells need quick energy, what are they going to turn to first? Carbohydrates. Something else that's interesting, our central nervous system is only able to burn carbohydrates for energy. What we're going to see a little bit later is that we can also burn fat for energy, our body cells. However, there's something about the central nervous system, brain and spinal cord, can only burn carbs. All the rest here is extra. We're going to have a whole chapter on this later. But please, 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 no one should miss this. What is the function of carbohydrates? Energy. More specifically, it's what our cells go to first for energy. And then lastly, it is the only possible fuel source for our central nervous system. So folks, we need carbohydrates. All right, let's talk about lipids, fats. Oh, yes. Lipids is a broad term. When we think of lipids, what you're probably thinking of would be our triglycerides, otherwise known as our dietary fat. This is the yummy fat, the Big Mac fat, the fried chicken fat, the chocolate fat. There's also a second type of lipid called a phospholipid. And unfortunately, my screen's being a little weird here. The third category is called sterols. Sometimes, let me check, because sometimes, yeah, sterols. So there's 3 different types of lipids. So lipids is an umbrella term, okay? Lipids is an umbrella term. Underneath lipids are different types. What you think of as lipids are our triglycerides or dietary fats. That's the fat in food. But we also have other lipids that are important, which we're going to talk about, phospholipids and sterols. You don't need to know what these look like. I just wanted to put it on there to show you it looks different structurally than a carbohydrate. Everything else here is extra. Right now, we're introducing that lipids is an umbrella term. Underneath lipids are 3 different types. The triglycerides or dietary fat, that's what you think of as fat, the fat in food, phospholipids, and sterols. Let's give a little bit more information. Like I already said, the triglycerides, that's what you think of as our dietary fats. We also have our second type of lipids called a phospholipid, and this might be new to you. Phospholipids make up, and you should know this, make up our cell membrane. If I draw a cell, it could be a nerve cell, looks like a kite. It could be a muscle cell that kind of looks like that. It could be a fat cell. Fat cells look like little bubbles. Any cell in the human body, the outer membrane of it, like the outer cell membrane that separates the inside from the outside, if we magnify it, it looks like this. It's made up of phospholipids. We're going to talk more about it later. But fat is more than just the dietary fats. We need fat to make up our cell membrane, which is really important. Another example of lipids would be sterols, and an example of that is cholesterol. We're going to talk about the function later, but you've heard of cholesterol. It's a different category of lipids. Okay, let's talk about functions. I'm going to skip this for now because I want to come back to that. I want to talk about functions. What we're going to focus on would be the triglycerides and the phospholipids. These are our big 2. We'll talk more about cholesterol. Triglycerides, long-term energy. We just got done talking about carbohydrates, right? What is the function of carbohydrates? It is used as energy in our cells. But what do we say about carbohydrates? It is what our cells go to first. Well, what do our cells go to second? Fats. So fats are also a form of energy, can give us energy, but it's a little bit longer term energy. Now we're going to talk a whole bunch about this later, because what ends up happening is we tend to always be burning, your cells tend to always be burning a carbohydrate fat mixture. It's just that in the short term, we tend to be burning more carbs. Carbs are a quick energy source. If we need energy for longer, we tend to rely more on fats. Short-term energy, carbohydrates. Long-term energy, these triglycerides. And of course, protection, insulation. You know this from the fat in our body. There's a layer of fat under our skin. There's a layer of fat around all of our organs that serves a function, protection, insulation. And we already talked about the phospholipids. They're important because they make up our cell membrane. Those are the things you need to know from this slide. Good. Let me go back. You don't need to know cholesterol for now, but what I would like you to know would be our triglycerides. I said it with the carbohydrates. These are going to be tattooed into your memory. What percentage of our daily diet should come from carbs? Somewhere between 45 and 65%. Somewhere between 45 and 65% of our daily diet calories should come from carbs. Now we're adding the dietary fat. And for simplistic sake, I'm just going to say fat, knowing that I mean the triglycerides. Somewhere between 20 and 35% of our daily calories should come from fat. You need to know these numbers. Okay, good. Let's talk about protein. So we're talking about macronutrients. We talked about carbohydrates. We talked about fat. And now we're talking about protein. We're going to have whole chapters about these later. I'm just setting the scene. So what are some of the important things about protein that we need to know? One thing you need to know, something that's unique about protein. Structurally, it contains nitrogen. Now remember, I'm not going to ask you to know or draw a specific molecule, okay? I just have these pictures on here just to show you. In particular, we can see something here, something that's unique about protein. Do you see this N? That's an N for nitrogen. If you go back to carbohydrates and fat, look at the triglycerides. I see H for hydrogen. I see C for carbon. And then I see O for oxygen. Look down here. Hydrogen, oxygen, carbon. But do you see nitrogen? Do you see an N? No. So something that makes protein unique, in fact, it's where it gets its name, the amino acids, is it contains nitrogen. And that's going to come back to us later when we talk about that later this course. Okay, so first thing to know about protein. Structurally, it contains nitrogen. Carbohydrates and fat do not. What are the structural components of proteins? Amino acids. I'm sure you've heard of those. Just like we have monosaccharides, disaccharides, and polysaccharides that make up our carbohydrates, proteins are made up of these smaller structural units called amino acids. You should know there are 20 amino acids in the body. So every protein in our body, every protein that we eat in food, is made up of some combination of these 20. All right. The structure varies. It's a little bit different. Carbohydrates are just these sugars linked together in a chain. Our triglycerides are these fatty acids linked together in a chain. Okay, fine. But protein can look like a whole bunch of different things. Don't worry about this now, other than to see that the structure of protein, it can be a long linear chain. It can be laid out in bands like muscle. It can be balled up in these globular structures. That happens to be hemoglobin, which transports oxygen on our red blood cell surface. So protein can take on a lot of different forms. Okay, we said that there are 20 total amino acids. Of those 20, you need to know which are considered essential and which are considered non-essential. Here's what they mean. An essential amino acid, it gets its name because these amino acids cannot be made by the body. Therefore, they are essential to get through the diet. It's a little weird how they name these, so it might be a little counterintuitive. But if you spend some time with it, you'll get it. An essential amino acid is an amino acid that our body cannot be made by our body, An essential amino acid cannot be produced by our body. Therefore, they are essential to get through food. Because our body cannot make them, the only way we're going to get them is if we bring them in through food. 9 of the 20 are considered essential. I have listed them here, but you do not need to know all 9. You only need to know that 9 out of the 20 amino acids are considered to be essential. Our body cannot make them, therefore it is essential that we bring them in through food. which means that, see, once you memorize one, folks, a lot of times you can make sense of the other. A non-essential amino acid, let me change a different color. What about, you feeling green? I'm feeling green. A non-essential amino acid can be produced by the body. Did you know 11 out of the 20 amino acids our body can make? Again, I have listed them, but you don't need to memorize them. This is new, folks. It's not the same for our carbohydrates and triglycerides. Excuse the outside noise. Your body cannot make from scratch a carbohydrate. Your body cannot, in the same way, make from scratch a triglyceride. So this is something that's unique to the protein. Your cells, pretty much all of your body cells, billions, all of your cells make protein. This is unique. The ones that they can make are called non-essential. You don't need to know this. We're going to talk about it more later. Don't worry about that for now. Let's talk about dietary intake. Remember, folks, how many did we say for carbs? Somewhere between 45 to 65% of your daily diet should come from carbs. What did we say for fat, meaning the triglycerides? Somewhere between 20 and 35% of our diet should come from fat. Now we get to protein. Somewhere between 10 and 35%. So fat and protein are pretty similar in their recommended ranges of how much we need. It is also pretty standard to talk about grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. So I'd like you to know this number also. So know the range, but also this number. For a sedentary person, sedentary means someone who's not very active, so non-athlete, they need 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. If you wanted to do the math, I'll share with you my numbers. I'm about 150 pounds. To convert pounds into kilos, take your pounds, divide by 2.2. I'll get my calculator so I can be specific. 150 divided by 2.2. I'm about 68 kilograms. So I would take my weight in kilograms, which for me is 68 kilograms, and I'd multiply it by 0.8. So based on that, I need 55 grams of protein per day. Now, if you're an athlete, that number goes up. 1.0 grams per kilogram of body weight, 1.2, 1.4, something like that. We're going to talk about this much more later, folks. Just know for a sedentary person, 0.8 grams per kilogram. All right. We're going to talk about functions. Let me give you the easiest way that I know to describe the functions of protein. Here we go. I get excited. Now, folks, some people, I know you all do, some people say, oh, Dr. Jenkins, she's a protein hater. That's not true. That's not true. I'm just giving you the biology of this, right? Because our body can produce much of the protein for us, we don't need as much through diet. Let me go back for a second, right? What is our percentage? 10 to 35%? That might be surprising to you. If I had asked you carbs, fat, and protein, what do you think we need to bring in the most of per day? You might have said protein. And I can see why. Protein has become popular now. And a lot of it has to do with the marketing. Protein, protein, protein. High protein's good. But what I'm trying to tell you is we don't need as much as you might think through diet. And why is that? Because our body can make a lot of the protein we need. That is not true of carbohydrates and fat. So I'm not a protein hater, but having this knowledge can be very helpful. We don't need as much protein through our diet because our cells make over half of it for us. So I'm not saying protein's not important. I'm just explaining to you that you don't need as much as you think, probably, because our body makes it for us. Okay, let's talk about functions. The number one function of protein, and these are the categories that I think it's easiest to understand. One big function of protein is structure. This is what you think of. Protein is what gives structure to our muscles. We have over 600 skeletal muscles. 600! I'm not joking, over 600 skeletal muscles. And that's not even considering cardiac muscle. You know, the muscle that makes up your heart, that helps to pump blood throughout your body so you can live. Protein is a primary structure to muscle. Protein also gives structure to our hair and nails, ligaments, tendons, skin, that isn't on there, but skin. We have a lot of skin, right? So one big function of protein is structure. One big function that you may not think of, but is equally as important, your body uses protein to form a lot of important chemicals. I'm trying to simplify this. One big function of protein is that your body uses protein to build or form a lot of important chemicals. Hormones. You know what hormones are? Growth hormone, right? For example. Enzymes. We need enzymes everywhere to speed up chemical reactions. Neurotransmitters. Hemoglobin. Hemoglobin is what transports oxygen on the red blood cell. Antibodies, part of our immune system. And this is a short list. But protein is used to build a lot of these important chemicals. Now, lastly, these two, kind of big functions of protein. A third, and I put it third on purpose, your cells will only burn protein for energy as a last resort. What do our cells rely on for energy? Carbs and fat. This is also another misnomer, a lot of the misconception. A lot of people get the sense that your cells burn protein for energy. And they do, but only in small amounts. Small, small, small. Your cells, it's built this way on purpose. It's built so that if we're eating properly, we have plenty of fuel from carbs and fat. That's how it's designed. Carbs are quick energy, fat long term. You want your cells to be relying on carbs and fat. Protein, we want to put more towards these first two. And then only in very small amounts. Look, only 10 to 15% of all of our energy comes from protein. What that means is 85 to 90% of our cells' fuel comes from carbs and fat. If we don't have enough carbohydrates, it means that your cells are going to have to rely more on protein. And if we have to rely more than 10 to 15% worth of energy, it takes away protein from its other functions. So an athlete especially needs carbohydrates for energy. And if you're on a low carb diet, you risk not having enough energy for your cells. And then what's going to happen is your muscle cells are going to start to burn more protein for energy, which takes away protein to be able to give structure to the muscle, which means that you're not going to perform as well. Okay, good. It lists these other functions. You don't need to go through these. I just gave you some more pictures. What you needed to know is right here. All right. We're going to finish the introduction to the nutrients, and then we'll end this first video, and then we'll pick it up after this. So our last macronutrient is water. Remember, a macronutrient is something that we need more of in our diet. Carbohydrates, fat, protein, and water. Water is a macronutrient. We need a lot of it, but you know that. You know what water's made up of? Hydrogen, H2O, oxygen. We know we have a lot of it. You don't need to know this breakdown. All I'm saying is we are made up of a lot of water. We are made up of a lot of water. That's all I want to say there. Let's give some functions. And I'm actually going to circle transportation. There's a lot of water in our bloodstream, and that's how we transport things through the body. Water is a fantastic solvent, particularly in the bloodstream. It allows things to dissolve in it. Very important chemically. Water can help us with protection. We have a thin layer of cerebrospinal fluid around our brain and spinal cord. Protection. We have a thin layer of water around our heart for lubrication. So when it contracts and relaxes, there's less friction. And then we need water because it plays a role in a lot of our chemical reactions. There's other ones, of course. Those are the 4 I would like you to know. Good, good, good. Okay, let's end this first part on micronutrients. A micronutrient is something that we don't need as much of in our diet. And what are they? Vitamins and minerals. You don't need to know all of the specific functions yet. Right now, we're introducing that micronutrients are vitamins and minerals. It's what we need less of in our diet. I'm not saying they're less important. We just don't need as much of them for them to be able to carry out their necessary function in the body. And in terms of function, we're just going to start off by saying these micronutrients are our supporting cast. Think of a team or a Broadway show. You have your main actors and actresses. You have your star players. But there's also the supporting cast. They may not get as much glory. They may not need as much training, whatever. Take this analogy however far you want. So they're kind of in the background, but they're still really important. We're going to talk later about their functions. Something I do just want to mention. These vitamins and minerals do not directly provide energy. We're going to see sometimes they can indirectly help with energy metabolism, but it's not a direct form of energy. For that, we rely mostly on carbohydrates and fat. We're just going to say supporting cast. I bet you like that, don't you? Perfect. Make sure you review the important things that we talked about. Okay, I'm going to stop this first video, and then we're going to come back and we're going to start to dive in the next big topic, which is nutrient guidelines. All right, see you next time, folks.